reset this thing again. I haven't listed. What was it? Yeah, that little up button.
All right, welcome along everybody. We've maybe got not quite so many people as the last couple of weeks, but that's okay. We'll still go through and talk about what we were going to. So we are going to go over some typical areas and how to avoid them today. Just like last time, we'll get everyone to make sure their microphones are muted. We'll run through these errors and some tactics to avoid them, and then we'll allow time for questions at the end. If you've got anything as we go along, just chuck them in the comments. And otherwise, I think we'll get into it. Jean, do you want me to kind of introduce the errors we're going to talk about first, and then we'll go through? Or yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk about three kind of clusters or types of error. First of all, we're going to talk about parallel errors and explain what that means. The different types of parallel error you can make. Then we're going to talk about control circle errors and some misnomers around when these mistakes actually occur. So that's errors that result in a problem pretty close to the control. And then last of all, we're going to talk about what we think is probably the number one largest group of errors, which are called concentration errors. And while we don't have a panacea for these, we've got some things you can try to help to kind of minimize the risk. All right. So do you want to get us going on parallel errors, Gene? First of all, what are parallel errors?
So a parallel error is when you're making good sense with your navigation. So that might mean that your handrails and your stepping stones and your direction might all be suggesting that you're doing well, but you're actually not in the right place. So it feels like you're going good, but you're actually wrong. And you can maintain this feeling of going okay for quite some time. For example, we'll look at this leg here from the start triangle to number one to explain what a parallel error could be. Even if you planned it out well, there's a good chance that you could still make such an error.
So what do you mean by going okay? Do you mean?
So by going okay, I mean on track. So if you're trying to go straight from one control to another, and there's a few hills to tick off on your way, you might be able to make an error where you're still running almost in the right direction, and you're still ticking off hills which you think are the right hills, but they're actually not the right hills.
So in a sense, you've got a plan, you're implementing it, but you're just picking up the wrong features.
Yeah, that's right. You're making it fit to where it almost fits, and it fits enough that you can trick yourself into thinking it fits. And I think that's why it's such a big error. If you knew you were making the error, it wouldn't happen, would it?
Okay, let's see on this leg. So start to one.
Let's see on this leg. So on this first leg from the start triangle, the way I would break it down is that you're running down this big slope here from the start triangle. There's a depression here.
The stepping stone.
So you've got a nice big stepping stone to catch you at the bottom. And then you might look, for example, that there's this low area through here to follow. And you might think that you're following through that low point, but actually you're following through this low point through here. And that would still feel good for most of the leg. And when you think you're getting close to the control, instead of heading up here to get your control, you're actually heading up onto this little ridge line. So you can have a good feeling of confidence through most of the leg, but because your direction in this area here wasn't perfect, and we don't want to be reliant on your direction being perfect all the time, but because it wasn't perfect, you have caused an error later on that wasn't evident until you couldn't find the control flag because you were looking in the wrong place.
Okay, so what's kind of happened, in other words, is you've had a plan, you've tried to implement it, but you've picked up the wrong things. So how can we avoid that?
Yeah, so the good way to avoid a parallel error is twofold. The first part is better planning. So if we acknowledge that parallel errors happen, and they happen quite often, then when you're planning your leg, so say you're standing at the start triangle planning out number one, you want to notice that there is a chance there are some very similar shapes here in the terrain. There's these low points here that both have a ridge line to the side of them. And so noticing that in advance is the first part.
Okay, so
if you don't notice that there's similar features, then you're not going to be doing the next step.
It's in our attack point and our stepping stone selection process that we actually make the mistake. We choose stepping stones that aren't so good.
Yep, we choose stepping stones that maybe not as unique as we thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be these parallel repeating very similar features in the terrain. So
how could you do that one differently? What could you select instead?
So the key here, I think, would be to notice that as we're heading from this big depression here, firstly, I'd be really tight on my direction. So making sure that I'm heading precisely in this direction and not in that direction. That's the first part. The second part is trying to find something much more unique in the terrain. And I think for me, it's identifying that if we were heading down the wrong line, the wrong low point, there would be this big hill to the south of us. And that's a big 3-contour hill. It should be very obvious in the terrain. Whereas if we're heading down the correct path, down these low points, there would be a 3-contour hill to the northwest of us. So now these situations are not compatible. The correct course and the incorrect course have a crucial difference, and so we can tell them apart. If you had just done a very simple planning of run through the first depression and then run through the second depression, first depression, second depression, then you're opening yourself up for the error. So
okay, so I guess to kind of wrap that all up, so parallel error is where you have a plan, but you misidentify features and end up navigating to the wrong place.
Yeah.
And a good technique for avoiding it is when selecting attack points, going for something that's really unique, or using kind of 2-factor identification. So using not just the low point, but something else next to it to ensure that you're going the right way. Does that sound right?
That's
2-factor confirmation, I guess.
And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to find something that is totally unique. You just have to find something that disproves the other possibility.
Okay. Should we jump to another example?
Yeah, we'll jump to another example on the same map. And I think these parallel errors happen very commonly on sand dune maps like these.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of repeating features that can be very tricky. So my next one here is 7 to 8. It's a similar kind of leg with this downhill, a lot of downhill running, and you can often be trying to go quite fast, but you can easily pick up the wrong depressions. And there's multiple ways you could do parallel errors on this leg.
So should we do a plan? Should we come up with a plan first and then see how we can make it fit?
Yeah, that's right. So if I'm feeling confident today, I'm a good red level orienteer and I'm trying to go straight. The handrails and stepping stones that I'm trying to use, I think the main one is this hill here. I'm taking a good direction I want to take a good direction from the control and stay on. There's this high point saddle through there, and then you're getting onto the hill, and then you're going southeast along this ridge until you get to the spur, follow the spur down, and then you're aiming across to the high point, and then you're being more precise in the circle. But as a plan, I think that's one.
So your direction is pretty much straight. Your simplification is to follow the high points, and you're going to anticipate the relative heights of the hills as you go.
Yeah, that's my plan. But obviously, we're talking about errors, so let's not be too perfect. But the reason that there's a good chance of a parallel error here is because you've got this slope that we have to go across here. If we don't take it in the right direction, like that would be the correct way. If we had imperfect direction through here, then we might find we're going down this ridge line there instead of where we wanted to go there. What would happen next is either we have a good direction and come across this low point, which might feel a bit like this low point here, and we'd only find a small hill instead of a big hill, and then we'd know something's...
I can see another parallel area you could make as well. You could come down this way. You could maybe come down, if you were having a bad day, maybe come down there and then hit the clearing and then have no idea where you are. If you had quite a poor direction, because the same plan would run. I'm going to go to the high point. I'm going to get to the high hill. I'm going to come off down a spur to a flat area, and then I'd hit a clearing and I'd wonder where I was. So same thing, implementation incorrectly.
Yeah, that's the same thing. You might be happy with your little checklist, like we've described in some of our previous episodes. You might be happy with that, but this is how the checklist can lead you astray. There's even another possibility over here. If we were to maintain a bad direction, you would hit the track, or if you weren't paying attention and didn't hit the track, you would end up on this big hill here, which would feel very similar to this hill here. And that's when you have an absolute disaster, because you have really high confidence. You've ticked off everything on your checklist the whole way to where you're expecting to see the control flag. And that's why these errors are so devastating, because you have high confidence, but you're totally wrong.
Okay, so we've talked about two-factor confirmation as a way we can avoid it. Is there another way we can avoid parallel error that we might use on this league?
There's definitely options to take really safe route choices.
Yes. So that's the other way. That's kind of the other way that we can do it, really. Like we could go all the way to the east and pick up the track.
Yep. You could go take a long compass bearing through here, staying on the slope, just sticking to the contours through here. Yep.
Or we could go...
And then you've got track the whole way, and you've got a pretty reliable following along the ridge line there to get to the control. Or there's also a route out to the west where you can go very safe, use that hill as a stepping stone, then use this as a handrail along there. So there are options that don't have the chance for parallel errors.
And if we were to go straight, we could just make sure that we included some more unique features as our stepping stones. So we could make sure we go right to the top of the biggest hill.
Yep. So you could come through here, make sure you're on the top. You could go through here, make sure you're on the top. You could come down here and maybe try to find these hills. So you could be more precise. We don't want to encourage people to be so precise that they're moving so slowly. But if you are trying to go straight, then there are ways that you can get more confidence. For example, if you were worried about running down here, you want to make sure that you get to this hilltop before you run down the hill. So from this hilltop to this hilltop is pretty much flat. Whereas if you are at this hilltop and you start running straight downhill, then that's not part of your plan. So there are a few ways to avoid it.
Okay, cool. So that's parallel error. We've said it's when you have come up with a plan, but you've implemented it incorrectly. And some ways that you can avoid it is you can use kind of two-factor confirmation. That's using two pieces of detail in the terrain to figure something out. Or you can look wide and use wider route choices. And finally, the use of concrete features. So using really obvious features like big hills or tracks or junctions to guide you to a control. All right, so control circle errors. And now this one, the key to this one is thinking about the point on the league that the error was made. So can you describe control circle errors to us, Gene?
Yeah, so a control circle error is when you've lost what you think is a lot of time very close to the control. So these errors are often very frustrating because you've got quite close to the control, but you're spending a lot of time faffing around.
The old grid search.
Yeah, you just you're close, but you're just getting really frustrated because you can't find the flag, and other people are hanging around as well. So you're close, but you just can't nail that final step into the flag. And these can often happen on leagues with more fine detail. And the reason why they happen is because we haven't acknowledged the precision required to get the flag in advance. So we've hit the control circle with what we think is a plan. So we've got some sense of confidence.
So we've checked our control description. We know we're looking for a null.
Yeah, you're looking for a null, and maybe you've even had a good attack point, but then you just haven't made sense from then on. And that often happens on a leg such as 26 to 27, I think we're going to look at here. A good way to approach this might be to use perhaps this to use this vegetation boundary through here. So there's a difference between two different types of trees.
Great handrail.
Yeah, really useful handrail, and it's got a nice corner.
So excellent attack point. Perfect.
Yeah. So it's
easy
got a nice
leg.
attack point, and you're feeling really confident. You're like, I'm not messing around with all this stuff up in here, crazy detail. Like, I'm not messing with that. I'm just going straight on the vegetation boundary, and then
going to pop into a re-entrant, and there's going to be a small depression.
I'm just gonna come off the corner and into the U depression, and it's gonna be sweet. Whereas we know this area as it's Manuka forest, so the visibility isn't the best. It's also very detailed, and because the map's so detailed, it's been simplified a little bit. There's lots of little ups and downs, and you easily not see the flag. And so those of us who run with GPS tracking can clearly see times when we're just like, it's just not making sense, and then we've finally found the control. And that can waste a lot of time. You can spend 2 minutes getting from here to here, and then 4 minutes getting from there to there. I'm sure everyone's experienced this.
I think every orienteer has had a race ruined by a mistake like this.
This is it.
So the critical thing we wanted to say with these errors is where the error actually occurred. And the problem isn't actually happened in the control circle. What's happened with these is that an error has been made way back at the start of the leg. So what's happened there? So
this is a planning error. You have got way too much confidence because you've seen, oh yeah, sweet, easy peasy, straight in. How could I screw this up? What you should be thinking is, okay, most of this leg is very easy, and I'm going to smash that portion of the leg. But this last part of the leg is tricky. And you can see it's tricky because there's nothing obvious. There's no big feature that's going to point you towards exactly where the control is placed. So you need to notice early on that this is going to require a lot of vigilance, and you're not going to just be romping in there with high confidence. You need to know which parts of the leg you're doing fast and which parts of the leg you're going to really focus on getting the fine navigation correct. So how do we get the fine navigation correct? Well, this requires looking really carefully at the control circle. This is about an investment of time. Upon identifying that the control circle is going to be hard to navigate because there are not highly significant features, we need to bring the standard of what is useful and what we should be navigating on down to these smaller features. And you might need to walk to get some of these things right. So from our attack point on the corner of this vegetation boundary, the things that I would suggest using is noticing that there's this spur here. Then you want to notice that there's a reentrant here. And you notice the shape of these. You notice how they're positioned relative to each other. And you're really precise about how they're positioned relative to each other. It's not just a one-dimensional checklist. This is really getting your mental imagery going and how you are moving through this 3D world. And then you know that there's this knoll on top of a spur that's coming up, and you know all these extra things, and you know that you're not going past the knoll, you're not going to head over there. You know that the U depression is directly in line with the reentrant, and you're using these 3 points and there's also this reentrant here, which is at the same height as the U depression. And so you know all these things, and you're pulling them together to pull you into the control circle.
So to kind of step that back, because that seems like a huge amount of thinking to do. The real important part is that this happens when you've considered the leg. So back in one of our earlier talks, we talked about route choice, attack point, control are the three things you should think about when simplifying a league. So essentially what's happened if you've stuffed this league up is you've thought about your route choice, which is along the vegetation boundary. You've thought about the attack point, which is the corner of the vegetation boundary. And then you've got lazy on control. And you've said, oh, it's a U depression. It's so close. I'm just going to get it. But what we're saying is that you need to think, okay, this terrain looks tricky and risky. There's no big features. And I'm not going to cut corners. Back when I'm planning my league at the start, I'm going to make sure that I include that C for control circle in my plan. And I'm going to think about those things Jean mentioned. So really trying to visualize, not just read a control feature off the descriptions, but visualize what you're going to be seeing when you come into the circle.
Yeah, so really thinking about these things proactively, not just bailing into the control circle and realizing upon hitting the control circle that this is hard.
And it's not just
beforehand.
It's not just the super detail rich areas that this occurs in either.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to look at.
It's actually really important in sprint orienteering. So
yeah, really important with sprint orienteering. You're like, oh yeah, I'll do that, and then you get there's a wall. Like there was an impassable wall right before the control. Like you've just been totally played by the course setter. And you need to know exactly what is happening in that control circle.
Okay. So
before you get going.
So second type of error, control circle error. The way that you avoid control circle error is you make sure you include the C back when you're planning a league. Make sure you do more than just read the description and that you visualize what the control circle is going to look like. So yeah, what's our next example?
So here's a more vague league from 4 to 5. We have this nice kind of smooth area. It's pine forest. The visibility is okay. You can see fairly far. You've got this interesting, very dark green area off to the side. Very dark green over there. Very vague and smooth through there. And we've got this really detailed area over there. So we can kind of simplify it to that degree. And again, maybe we want to use the edge of the green area to give us some confidence. Or maybe we're quite happy taking a compass bearing and using the hilltop as a stepping stone. And then maybe we're still going to carry on with the compass bearing and use this hill here and then carry on. It doesn't really matter how you approach this leg. You need to realize early. So, ideally when you're planning the leg all the way back here, that the tricky bit on this leg is going to be getting this small knoll in this quite vague area of smooth contours. And it's really important to notice when planning what things you can use to pinpoint exactly where this small knoll is going to be relative to the other features around it. And have a really good mental image of this hill here, this hill here, and these are pretty flat hills, like 2.5 meter. No, is this 2.5 meter contours?
Yeah.
And there's this hill here, and it's kind of between them all, but closer to one of them, closer to that northwestern hill. If you don't have that clear image in your head, whether you're coming from this is your attack point or this is your attack point, you're very susceptible to wishful thinking. So I'm sure you can all reflect on one time when you're running in what you thought was the right direction and you were losing confidence a little bit, and you started going over there and started going over there, and you're not following a straight line anymore, and you're looking desperately into the trees ahead of you, and you're trying to see a knoll. Oh, is that a knoll? Looks like a little hill. You see some sunlight on a cuttigrass bush. Is it the orange? Is it an orange flag? But you've already lost it. You need to know in advance all the proportions of the hills in this area. This guy, that guy, how they relate to your attack point, whether it's the hill or the vegetation. You need to know how they relate and where the flag is positioned to the whole control circle, not just checking the descriptions to see, oh, it's on a knoll. How do the proportions work in the control circle? Where is this flag relative to your attack point and the other fine features?
Cool. I think that's a pretty good wrap up. Shall we move on to our next type of error, or our last type? one little comment about those control circle errors as well is in relays. First leg of any relay off to the first control, you always spot the people who haven't visualized what control they're on because they show up at the wrong control feature. So
yeah, too much wishful thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So last one we're going to talk about are concentration errors. Now for the other two, we've given some quite straightforward strategies for trying to minimize the risk. But this one is a little bit more intangible, a little bit more abstract, something which requires a bit more, it's not as black and white, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's not right. That's right. That it's not as simple to nail down. I'm going to use two examples of how it might go. We'll talk about the leg first, just to get our bearings. So we're looking at 11 to 12. This is a tough red leg. We've got vegetation features and contour features only to use. I think the key features here are this valley. There's this reentrant through here, and there's a big spur here. And the plan might be to follow the spur, find the vegetation, and go through the gap and follow this vegetation to the control. That might be one way of doing it, and that's fine. We've planned it out. We're going to take it in that direction. And say you think, okay, well, my first stepping stone is, or the handrail that I'm going to follow is quite far up the hill, and I just really need to get going. I'm just going to start running fast and get on up that hill. And so what happens now is you're thinking about moving, you're thinking about running, you're thinking about what's happening later in the race. Maybe somebody else comes past you and you're just getting on with it, running up the hill. But what has happened in the meantime, when your mind's thinking about all these other things, is you've forgotten what you're looking for. You've forgotten that you're looking for the spur. You don't know which direction you're looking for it in, and you're missing out on hitting that spur and then knowing what the next feature is. So, I mean, this is a waffly way of saying you're daydreaming, basically. And you could choose any league to do this on, but this is quite a good one because you can see how when you lose concentration on a leg like 11 to 12, just how hard it can be to relocate.
I mean, you could imagine if your brain switched off or you focused on running a bit harder, you could end up a bit to the south, and there's a nice wee gap between the green, and you could make a parallel error essentially.
That's right.
And then who knows what's happening around here? You'd see all these rocks and you think, oh, but they didn't map that many rocks in other places, and that could happen. Or you could stop early, you could hit this and then turn, and you basically would lose track of all of your navigational cues.
Yeah. So say you've made a plan and we're looking for these features, and then you stop thinking about the plan. When you come back to reality and you come back to your plan, you don't know what you've missed, basically. And we can be daydreaming for like a minute at a time. And if you don't have something to continually pull yourself back to the task of looking for the spur, looking for the reentrant, looking for the green, then you're just going to keep running until you hit something, and then you're going to try to work out where you are. And yeah, as Tom was saying, you might find when you come back to reality, are you going to be in this gap thinking you're at that gap? Are you going to be on the edge of this green? Or you're going to be on the edge of this green thinking that you're on the edge of that green?
Mm-hmm. So how can we minimize that risk? What are some things we can do?
I think some really good ways that you can do this may sound crazy, but they involve talking to yourself. Maybe it's just inside your own head, but I think telling yourself what your plan is constantly and just reminding yourself, I'm looking for my spur. Where is the spur? Where is the spur? Still looking for the spur. I'm checking my map. And this is a training technique that we use quite a lot called verbalization, where you're constantly explaining to a partner who's running beside you what you're doing. And it's amazing doing this exercise because your concentration is so on point. You are not letting anything slip, and you never make mistakes because you're not letting anything slip. You're telling your partner everything that's going through your head, and you don't drift off into the forest only to lose contact and then relocate in the wrong place.
Okay. Another similar one, which is kind of on a similar vein, is using trigger words. So sometimes people will have a word that they say to themselves when they can feel their concentrations maybe waning, that will push them to do something specific. So for example, your trigger word might be direction, and you just train yourself so that when you can start to feel things not quite right, or at multiple points along a leg, you say to yourself direction, and that prompts you to always look at your map and forces your eyes down to try and push you back into the navigation process.
Yeah.
So
and I think the really important thing about trigger words is it's something that's actionable. So maybe it makes more sense at this stage to phrase it as, what is my direction? And often asking yourself, what is my direction? And then you have to answer the question, is my direction good? So another trigger word could be, what is coming up next? And if you just keep asking yourself that simple question, what am I looking for next? And forcing yourself to answer it, that pulls you back to the plan. Because in order to answer that, you have to know where you are in your plan, what stepping stone you're looking for next, or what handrail you're looking for next. If you can't answer yourself, then you need to stop and work things out before you get way off track.
And if you think back all the way back to the first episode we did, the kind of last part of the plan, the direction, the simplification, know where you're going, that forward thinking is all about trying to maintain your concentration. So you've always got a next feature queued up in your head to keep you focused and keep you concentrated. So you can do that through trigger words, you can do that through verbalization, but it's all trying to make sure that you stay focused on the navigational task at hand.
Yeah, that's right. It's about focus. And yeah, it's very, we can't say this enough. It's often when you're looking at your orienteering and you've had a bad run and you're getting lost all over the place, and you're trying to figure out what went wrong, and you're saying, oh, my direction isn't very good, or I wasn't picking very good route choices, or I couldn't understand the vegetation. We find that very often it's less an issue of your compass being, you can't take good compass bearings, and less of an issue that your route choices were bad, and more of an issue that you weren't concentrated. And that was more of the fundamental problem, is that you weren't putting enough mental attention into navigation, and you were spending far too much time thinking about running, or whatever. I'm thinking about what I'm having for lunch, like things that are really not helpful to the task at hand.
Right. Should we do, this is our last example, and then we'll kind of recap everything. So an example of another way that you could maybe minimize the risk of a concentration error on this leg.
Yeah. So concentration errors happen all the time. Like, it's very hard to train our minds. We can do concentration training and try to improve our mind, but often, this is an example at the start of the leg, but at the start of a course, but this is extremely applicable towards the end of the course when you're beginning to get mentally tired, is take the easy way out. So reducing the risk, basically. Being more concentrated when you need to be concentrated, but finding places where you can give yourself a bit of a mental break, and then you can drive really hard on the navigation for a short period of time when you have to be really vigilant and really focused. So obviously, looking at this leg from the start triangle to number 1, I'm sure we all agree this is a very hard leg. Coming into number 1, there isn't really anything overly distinctive before the control, doesn't matter where you're coming in from, it's not terribly distinctive. And we're looking at a small cliff on a hillside with smooth contours. Oh man, this is looking pretty scary. If we try to do this straight, we're going to have to be so concentrated for 4, 5, 6 minutes, picking up a lot of these little trees, picking up the spur, trying to find where we are in this reentrance. Maybe we can see the small earth bank, maybe picking up tree by tree by tree.
We've also got the distractors of the people that we're starting with, like the people on the same start time as us. So we're going to be super at risk of concentration errors on this first leg.
Yep. And maybe it's just so terrifying that all you're thinking about is, what if I get lost? What if I screw up my first control? You're just thinking about things that are not actually part of your navigation process.
So take the easy option, right?
So boom, around the track, here we go. Maybe we come along to the fence corner there. Maybe we even come along to the second tree, so the first tree and then second tree on the fence there before hitting it. So now we've only got that much concentrating to do. And boy, we better concentrate well in that time. It's going to be tricky. But that is an achievable task. And it might not be achievable to you to maintain super high concentration the whole way.
We can burn off the adrenaline on the way out of the start triangle, up the hill. Down the track, we can have a few deep breaths and a few words to ourselves. We can use some of those trigger words to help focus us as we come down into the trees. And then we can minimize losing concentration and ending up somewhere completely wrong.
Yeah, that's right. So we want to boost hard basically to this tree, this final tree here on the distinctive tree on the fence line. And then we're doing fine navigation. So maybe you're taking a direction to this tree, that distinctive tree, and then you're into the cliff. Something like that. But the point we're making is you need to know when to be really concentrated and when you can give your brain a rest, and not get those two things confused. There needs to be a clear separation between those two things. Make the most of one by running the wide route choices, and make the most of the other only when you need to do these really direct paths through the terrain and do them really well.
Okay, let's recap, hey? So we've talked about 3 common types of errors that you can make in an orienteering course, and some ways to mitigate them. So the first main type were parallel errors. These are the type of mistakes you make when you've had a plan, but you've ended up navigating using similar features and being in the wrong place. Ways you can minimize this include 2-factor confirmation of where you are, using 2 different types of features to navigate, looking wide and trying to pick legs which don't have those parallel features, or using things that are really concrete, really big hilltops or tracks. The second type of error we talked about was control circle error. And the key message here was that this is a mistake that while the time loss is at the control, the error has occurred at the beginning of the leg. It results from inadequate planning of what to expect in the control circle. To avoid this one, what you should do is really visualize what's in the control circle and not just read your control description. Last of all, and this is the biggest type of error in our opinion, was concentration errors. This is when, for whatever reason, you're running a leg and you start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, or who just ran past you and are they on your course. Basically, situations where you get your mind pulled away from the navigation process.
And for those of us who are really competitive, often it's thinking about your results.
Yeah.
Thinking about your performance and whether you're going to be satisfied with it and how you're going to explain to your friends that you suck.
And so some important ways you can minimize the risk of concentration errors is you can use trigger words or verbalization to help push your navigation process into the front of your mind, to really focus on forward thinking and what am I going to see next? What am I going to see next? And last of all, taking the easy option from a concentration perspective. It's something which can allow you to better spread your concentration effort over the whole leg. Now, if you wanted an easy little piece of homework to do, especially since we're going to have orienteering events soon, one thing that I might recommend is when you've run your course, get your map. It's always good practice to either use your GPS or even old school, drawn in pen where you actually went. When you've made a mistake, what I would recommend is draw a small circle on your route where you think you made the bad decision. So if you, for example, were on this map running from the start to 1 and you made a control circle error, you draw the circle right back at the beginning of the leg because you scheduled it. You didn't put time into thinking about your control circle. It helps you to focus in on where you make your errors and can really help improve your orienteering instead of just thinking, I stuff up the control circle all the time. Think about where the bad choices were made.
So yeah, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Clarify that. So what Tom's saying is, for example, your GPS route might look like this. You're running down here if you were being tracked. you'd come in here and maybe you made a mistake there. So someone who looked at this for the first time might say, oh, well, you made the mistake, here somewhere. That's where you kind of went off track. But what we're saying is, perhaps you made the mistake here. You made the mistake at the start of the leg because you never even recognized how dangerous that last part of the leg was. And at the start of the leg is when you should have been thinking about those things and planning well in advance about how you're going to handle that challenge.
Cool. Okay. So if anyone's got any questions, fire away. Otherwise, that's everything for this week. And we'll put this up on the website for next time as well. Thanks for coming, both of you.